Three, two, one. Welcome to Jim's Take, episode 150. It's a milestone. I'm very excited to be here. It's a big deal. 150 podcast episodes. And what better way to celebrate than to talk about failure? Yes, we're going to talk about the philosophy of failure today. I reference this a lot, especially in my industry, my type of work, right? Coaching, consulting, helping businesses, doing all that stuff. The topic of failure comes up a lot, and a lot of assumptions come up around the topic of failure. And I've heard it for so long, and I've always hated this kind of saying is, oh, they were just afraid to fail, or people are afraid to fail. The number one fear that people have is they're just afraid to fail. And I disagree. I disagree with that statement. I don't think people are afraid to fail. If you've heard previous podcasts, you know that I think people aren't afraid to fail. They're afraid of what people will think when they fail. And it's a social challenge. And so when we think about failure, I want to talk about a couple different things today. One, I want to talk about, what failure really is. Is there a fear of failure? How do we define failure? How should we define failure? And why our whole framework around it might be preventing us from doing some pretty awesome and incredible things. Because we kind of skip jump to this kind of pretend definition that we have that we've never really fully defined. And so when we understand who's dictating our failure and who says it, maybe it's failures a lot on my mind. One, I haven't written the new book yet. I'm still getting there. I got to do it. I know I got to do it. People talk about it a lot in the workplace. I'm hearing a lot about it now. It's buzzing around. I've got an Ironman in 2 weeks that I've not properly trained for. That's a load on my mind. So there's a lot of failure, things that hover around. But if you know me, and if you've known me for the past few decades, you know that I really kind of enjoy this kind of little bit of a risk to see what's going to happen. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, fine, whatever, right? But as I reflect on my own self, there's an emotional risk to doing the really important things. And are there fears preventing us from the really big emotional risks? And does failure play into that in some kind of way, right? Do you not write the book because you're afraid of the rejection? Do you not ask for something for your business because you're afraid of the rejection or the misinterpretation or whatever it is? Are we preventing us from taking steps to do what it is that we want to do simply because of this fear of failure that we never fully defined and haven't really put a wrapper on? So that's what I want to talk about today. Let's talk about the philosophy of failure, what I think about failure, and I don't know, maybe it'll help me get past some things. Maybe it'll help you get past some things as well. And that's great. So how do we define failure? There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. And if you're going to talk about failure, you have to define it, you have to give it meaning so that you have something tangible that you can work with, right? And so there's a lot of different ways we could do this. Number one is we can get really philosophical, and we can go with, does failure even technically exist? And I'll pause there for a minute and say, does failure even exist? Now, depending on how you think about it, no, it does not. Or yes, it does. Okay, so there are different views on that. Now, I'm not getting it again. The 50 thing is hovering a little bit for me, so I'm getting very philosophical, and I care less and less about what other people think. We have some societal norms in terms of failure, right? You failed your class, which I've done. So the externally defined types of things, right? Your grades, which we won't talk about. You didn't get the promotion. You didn't win the game. You didn't win some accolade or award, bonus, whatever it is. Project didn't work out, whatever. And a lot of these are driven by external forces. And they'll tell you that you failed. And they'll tell you that you haven't hit your success metrics and all of these types of things. But is that really failure? Or is that just being driven to do something you don't really want to do, but you feel like you have to? I would argue, because I never really cared about that stuff, I would argue for me, failure, the defining failure is just simply not trying. Because in this kind of flighty way, yes, I have kids and we're all champions and everyone gets a trophy. When you make the attempt to put something out, the emotional risk of creating something or attempting something that you probably shouldn't have tried, or you really wanted to try, but you were afraid to do it. When you're able to do that, you take lessons away. It's part of growth. And it's how we challenge where it is that we sit, and it's how we get rid of the lethargy and the boredom and the disgruntledness of where it is, the regret, the guilt, if only, coach had put me in, we would have won state, Napoleon Dynamite, Uncle Rico type of thing. And maybe it's just not trying. If that's, one way to think about failure is just not trying. And if you try it, you may not win, but who defines that? We're going to talk about, part of identity and who gives you kind of the definition of what success is and all of those types of metrics. But you may have heard me give this analogy on previous podcasts. We don't really care about failure. If you sit in your basement and you go to make a model airplane and you fail at it, you just don't care. You move on with your day. If you can't do a puzzle, you fail at it, you move on, you go on with your day. You're not really a failure. People are not afraid of failing. What they're afraid of is what people will think when they fail. And it's very different. It's a social challenge. It's not a failure challenge. It's not a self-worth challenge. It's an insecurity challenge to a point, right? On, oh my gosh, what are these people going to think? But when you can kind of change your mindset, which we'll talk about changing mindset on this, of just becoming a person who just attempts a whole bunch of different shit and you don't care about the outcome, you're just here to experience it because we only have the present moment. And who cares if I can't finish it? I tried it and I did my best and oh well, let's move on. And that's a pretty cool vibe to have within reason, right? Some of those people are a little too much, but too much of anything is a problem. So I guess the first question is, as we define it, is how are you defining failure? And are you truly scared of failure, or are you scared of what people will think when you fail? And so when we define failure and what our fears are, is this a question of semantics? Maybe, right? But failure is real, I guess. But the fear of perceived failure may limit your pursuit of some authentic purpose or bigger deal of whatever it is that you want to do, right? So if you're perceived as a failure or think you're perceived as a failure, does that prevent you from trying the big and amazing things? Like, are you just not dreaming big enough? And I think that's a valid question. And so so when we think about what is failure and throw all the nonsense out and we break it down right into its naked, bare ass, sit on a bench thing, failure is our own kind of problem that we create in our mind, right? On what failure technically is or isn't. Now we could do our best and we could try it, and there's always someone better than us, and that exists. But the amount of people I speak to who are so disappointed because they see people doing things that they want to do and they're not good at it, the people doing the things they want to do, and they're jealous and it eats at them and it just ruins their day. But I would say the people who haven't tried, the reason they failed is because they haven't tried. That's the failure, is that you just haven't tried. You haven't done something. There's an emotional risk to trying. And it's all driven by this social anxiety that we have. And so if we're going to do that, so let's talk now then, so we've defined failure. Let's talk about how failure and identity pair in. Because when we're talking about social anxiety, we're talking about insecurity. There is, if we're measuring failure, what are you really measuring? If it exists, if failure really exists, this is a fun philosophical exercise. I'm going to go on a long run after this podcast to think more about it. If it exists, then it can be measured. And if it can be measured, what are you measuring? Are you measuring your self-worth? Are you measuring your capability? Are you measuring someone else's expectations? And when you then put that lens of your identity over failure, it changes the conversation again. So public speaking anxiety, launching a business, writing a book. It's, when you want to do these things, everyone's very quick to give you advice on how to do it and the way it should be from their perspective and their view and everything else. But these are extrinsic kind of messes that really just don't matter in terms of what it is you want to do. If I listened to everybody about my business, on how to build my business, I'd be miserable. I might have more money. I might be more successful with more clients. I might have gone in completely different directions, I would have hated every second of it because I'd be living their dream, not mine. And there is this idea of failure as being healthy. It's part of like building your identity. Be the person who takes risk and who embraces it. There's research that shows that people who take little risks and they fail become more introspective. They become more resilient, right? The failures aren't losses, they're actually lessons. And I don't want to be like this motivational speaker, like, oh, just keep failing. The winners are the ones who fail one less time, or whatever. I'm not talking about, but it's not about, the lesson's not necessarily in the failure. It's the lesson is in the trying. The lesson is in facing the challenge. And when we look internally at what motivates us, right? My business now versus what it would have been if I listened to more people. The intrinsic motivators we have, the motivators, the motivations, what motivates you? What values do you have? Right? These are what matters. External validation, while it's real and it feels really nice, it can be a little bit of a red herring. It's a red herring when we're sitting around and we're talking about failure and the external validation. What type of external validation really matters? And when we are authentic to ourselves, do we get the authentic external validation that really matters, that we're really looking for? Right? I was speaking to a person who was single, and they're trying to find these people and trying to be different things to different people. And it's like, look, if you're like, let's say you're single and you're a book reader, go read a book in like a coffee shop. Get cozy, get your coffee, read a book, right? Because that's true, authentic to you and what you enjoy. And not everyone's, the hot lady or the hot guy walking by may not notice you, but you know who will? The other readers and the people who speak your language and the people who catch your vibe, and they're going to be beautiful human beings, right? And they're going to be the people that you connect with and the people that you get your social validation from and the ones that really matter. If you want to build something awesome, you're going to find the people that really matter. And those are the only ones that really do. So the external validation, right? The snarky comments on social media, like all of these things that we're living for is, it's just wrong. The algorithms and everything, it's such this inauthentic thing. So when we do that, and we're trying to find our authentic people, we're trying to find our authentic selves, we're trying to find our authentic purpose, we then can define, am I living what I'm supposed to be living within some kind of context? And is that good enough for me? And then how do I challenge? And then the question we have then is, what assumptions do we have now based on external validations that don't matter, that are preventing us from taking the things that we wish to do, from thinking bigger about the things that we want to grow at? Maybe you don't want to build a dynasty. Maybe you just want to be quiet, read a book, and drink a cup of tea. That's what I like. What assumptions do you have that says I can't do that? And it's a long, hard reflection on who's driving your idea of failure. Is it somebody else or is it you? There's a saying, I don't know who said it. It may have been me, actually. If you're not failing recently, then you're not dreaming big enough. And I think the only really, when I think about the lessons and the big lessons we have from failure, and is really just comes from emotional risk. It's what we're afraid of, and playing small and safe to avoid failure leads to failure. Bill Burr, I think his name is, the comedian, talks about the failing comedian who's sleeping on a friend's couch because they can't afford it, and people will say that person's a failure. But he would disagree, saying that person's living their dream, right? They're doing what they want to do. They don't have the big house with the picket fence, and they don't have the dog and the 6 kids and the Mercedes Benz and all that other stuff. But I know plenty of those people. They're miserable. They're miserable because they've let external validation. Now, I know plenty of them are very happy too. Let's be honest, right? This isn't a kind of a class war thing. But when we think about, and here's where I want you to pause in terms of failure. What assumptions do you have that are preventing you from doing the things you wish to do? Okay, so what's the one thing you wish to do? Pick one. And why can't you do it? There's an efficacy play here. And if you read Carol Dweck, what did she write? She wrote growth mind. It's about growth mindset. I forget the book she wrote. Carol Dweck, Dweck. But one of the big things I took out of that was add the word yet to the end. I haven't done that yet because it's still a possibility and you could still do it. And if you want to do it, if you truly want to do it, if you have the hunger to do it, the desire to do it, you're going to make mistakes along the way, but you still have to take those first steps. And there's a difficult question to answer. You know, some people don't have the luxury to fail. And I would agree with that to a point. There is a privilege to be able to make mistakes when you're launching a business and taking a big risk and you've got a family and you want to leave corporate and you want to do those things. There is an anxiety to that, and it's real. But I would argue that micro risks, little steps, doesn't have to be a big splash all the time, can have significant, when we do them intentionally, can have significant impact as well towards what it is that you wish to do. And they're much more accessible than we think. These little micro risks, the little mini adventures, the trying something new and we can expand and we could do and we could go bigger. And, you know, have you ever done run a mile and you just take that risk and you try and you couldn't make it a mile, that's fine. But maybe you went 5 minutes. All right, fine. That's a lesson, right? And maybe you made a mistake in the way you ran. You challenge yourself again. There's whatever we plan, nothing is going to look exactly the way it is planned. I speak to a lot of people about launching their business. They put all this time into a business plan. I'm like, all right, throw it in the garbage, right? Because nothing is going to follow this business plan. The business I have today looks nothing like what I imagined it would be 10 years ago when I launched it. And we have to persist through obstacles, and it makes us bend and it makes us challenge. And we have to recognize that we're now in this situation. The context has changed. And so it's not necessarily a failure. It's more of a context has changed. So now we just kind of have to adapt and we ride the wave. And that's part of the fun. And so when we think about going forward, and we think about failures, one, we have to kind of define what failure is. And so I want you to do that. Define what failure is. Define your own success. What does success look like? And how are you going to get there? Make room for visible effort, right? It's not about just trying to do something behind the scenes. I think you have to do it visibly. That emotional component that gets tied up with failure is so important because you learn it's not that bad. You learn that it's, there's lessons, and people are incredibly supportive of people who take the effort and try something new. And just celebrate the process. It's not about the end. It's about trying something new. And would you do something if you weren't going to fail publicly? Would you do something different? I think these are real questions. And nobody remembers anyone because of what they thought about doing. They remember what people actually did. And that's an exciting prospect, right? I could intend to send you a Christmas card, but if you don't get it because I didn't do it, I gave myself credit, but you didn't get it, right? You have to go through the act visibly of doing it to get the credit that you really want for these things that you are afraid to fail at. And so do it. Try something new. Enjoy it. Embrace it. You only live once, man. And it's an incredibly fun time to be alive. Because you can do whatever the hell you want. There are no rules. There's nothing that can't be done. There are no rules. Those are my first two beliefs. Just don't kill anybody or do anything, don't hurt anybody else. Those are the rules, right? I guess. But anyway, have a wonderful week. Stop worrying about failure. Get rid of the anxiety. Get rid of all that other kind of stuff. Enjoy the process. Enjoy the testing. And go out and have a little bit of fun. Enjoy your summer. And everybody, I will talk to you soon. Thanks.